uno, dos, and there is no trace. Just me, your good buddy Spider, and over on the side, it's Steven the Intern.
Hello.
I like that term. I think it's branding now. I think you're
Yes.
you're forever Steven the Intern.
Yep. Always.
So here we are. I see the chat room is jumping already. We've got Sound
Yep.
Zeus, we got James, we got people coming in. It's great. Good to see everybody. Rob, of course, is not here this weekend. I think he's here next weekend, but I thought he had. Let me look at the dates here because I know on the 30th he has
Presentation
a
day?
presentation. So let me see what he's got. So I don't know if he'll be here next Friday either, because usually the night before a
I see you,
presentation
Sound Zeus.
he likes to kind of take it easy so he can get his research in and his sleep in. So I don't know. Maybe we'll be just the two of us for 2 weeks straight.
Okay.
I don't know.
We
He
got
might have
this.
forgot to mention that. But yeah, welcome everybody. Welcome. It is a cool night here in Ohio. We had some warm weather and then we got really cold. How are things going in your neck of the nation,
It's
Mr. Intern?
57 over here. Not too bad.
Slightly better than here. Now, I do have to say, my daughter is a little under the weather. She's doing better today than she was yesterday, but there is the chance that she might need something from me and come down the stairs. And I told her just to come down quietly, and if I see her, I'll probably make like some kind of a "I'll be right back" motion and
Hmm.
put Steven on the spot and
Uh-oh.
turn my stuff off for a minute or two. But I think she'll be fine. But if something happens, then she should be all right.
You're the
Just a
smart one
little stomach
here.
bug. Well, I guess it all depends. But yeah, what do we have? What do we have? What do we have? Tonight we're going to be talking about crafting your own reality versus reality that's attempted to be crafted for you, which is the subjective versus the objective. And I put a typo apparently, or my
Uh-oh.
tablet auto corrected up in the thing because it says the subjective is the objective. And maybe it is if you want to read it slightly
The
differently.
computer was
But
trying to tell us something.
yeah, but that's not what I meant to do. But subjective versus objective, or maybe it is the objective.
I agree with the typo.
That's a good philosophical.
Yep.
Philosophical. That's like a waffle.
A falafel.
Philosophical. Yeah, a
Yep.
falafel. There we go. That's
Yeah.
good. I like. I want to have
Philosophical
a
waffle. A
falafel.
falafel.
I like a falafel.
Yep.
Um, have some shawarma. Um, what am I even talking about?
Shawarma and falafels.
But it's gonna be a philosophical episode tonight. We got a lot of stuff to go on. First, before we dive right into it, I'm gonna give a really basic, super basic definition that doesn't really even come close to getting the ins and outs of it described, but we're gonna spend the rest of the show digging into that.
Yeah.
On its most basic level, you can kind of define the subjective experience as being one of the individual based on an individual's own personal feelings, opinions, prejudices, etc., and your own personal senses versus the objective. The objective is what can be um, proven, and I say proven with this because there's a lot of ins and outs. We're going to get to that,
Yeah.
but what can
Double-sided
be
experiment.
proven, um, verifiable by multiple parties, to be true across multiple spectrums. And that's a kind of a clumsy way to say it. But basically, the objective is like, let's say you go outside and your front door of your house, let's say it's made of wood. Okay. Your front door is made of wood.
Yeah.
You see it's made of wood. The people that made it for you made it out of wood. Your neighbor across the street can come knock on it and it's made of wood.
That would be
That is
objective.
Yep, technically an objective truth. We're not going to get into quantum theory about that yet, because that could blow that all into complete smithereens, and then you
Oh.
got no door. But subjectively, you could be like, "Oh, this isn't made of wood. This is made of the strongest steel. This is whatever." But nobody else agrees with you. But if you actually 100% believe it, that's a
Then it
subjective
changes
truth to you.
reality.
And that's the difference. It's individual belief and interaction versus multiple sources and verifiable evidence. So, with that being said, I'm going to switch over to Steven the Intern here and ask him how he feels about the subjective versus the objective.
All right. So I have had this theory in my head for over a decade now, and I think this topic is perfect for it. So I personally believe that we're all living in a dream, essentially. Someone at some point in time fell asleep into a dream, most likely I believe it was a coma. Someone is in a coma. And in their dream, they became lucid and they're like, hey, I'm the only one here. It's kind of lonely. Let me make some friends. So they made tulpas, which are thought forms in your mind, which is different from a tulka, which is external, but not important right now. But anyways, so I believe that they started creating their own tulpas in their mind to, keep them company so they didn't get so lonely in their dream. And they never woke up. And they've been asleep for so long that they forgot they were dreaming, and they eventually came to the conclusion that this is reality. But here's the problem. All the tulpas have also been around so long that they forgot they were tulpas and they think they are the real being. So they started making other tulpas and so on and so forth. And now we have billions of tulpas and nobody can remember who the original creator, aka in quotation marks, a god, was. And that would be subjective reality. And that is my own personal belief. But I also heard a really good example in one of the videos I was researching that said you can think of it like this. If there's a rain cloud, like your example with the door earlier, if there's a rain cloud and it starts raining, objectively, it is raining. But if, say, John wants to go golfing, then he's going to see the rain as a missed opportunity to go golfing and he's going to be upset about it. Or if Jenny is a meteorologist and she's trying to study the rain, then she's going to see the rain as a good thing and feel beneficial about it. And that goes back to what you were saying about it being related to everyone's personal past experiences from previous points in their life.
And that brings up a good point because as much as we have subjective and objective, and as much as people will all agree, like many people in the world, for the most part, all agree on things like the law of physics, the laws of physics. You have gravity, you have this, and you have that. Despite billions of people believing that all of that works, that's all informed by collective agreement of other people's subjective thoughts that are all in agreement. It can come down to, like, if there's a flower, okay, there's this flower in a field. The flower smells a certain way. One person goes up and smells it and be like, "Oh yeah, that smells like this," and it gives a description. Another person come up and like, "Well, I think it kind of smells like this." Another person comes along and says, "Well, I think it kind of smells like this," and maybe the fourth person says, "I agree with the second person," etc., etc.
Yeah.
They can all agree that it's a flower, but they can't all agree on what it smells like. So the objective and the objective are both two parts to the actual existence of whatever this flower is. And yet again, you might get somebody coming along and be like, "That ain't no flower, that's a weed, get rid of it."
The wave
So
function collapsed.
and it's an interesting way of thinking. And that's it. James is right as well. That's
Yes.
another thing to get into.
Yes.
Um because and I we're gonna get
Thank
into a
you,
couple
big
of
brother.
semi kind of controversial things tonight, but we're not going to get. I
Okay.
don't want to make anybody all up in their feels about it, okay?
Yeah.
But there's a couple things that are kind of clear about the effect of this, especially certain events from the last 3 or 4 years. Without mentioning any of these specific events that anybody can probably be like, "Oh yeah, I know exactly what you're going to talk about."
Yeah.
A lot of people saw those events from a lot of different perspectives.
Now
And
that you
while
mention it.
each side was like, "No, this is the truth, what you're spreading is misinformation, the answers have never ever quite evened out. It's always
Yeah.
been a disagreement. Like there has yet to be a definitive answer for any of the events, which means the entire thing has been subjective to a certain level, regardless of how
Yeah.
certain people feel. You might have a majority that feels that objectively this is what happened. You should have done this or you shouldn't have done that,
But there's
and
evidence for both sides.
that's it too. And that's we get that a lot, especially now. Like right now, when I was a kid, I would watch the news, and I remember the news being really formal still. I remember the news, you turn it on and they're just explaining, "Hey, this event happened."
Yeah.
I don't remember there being a lot of panels about it. I don't remember a lot of people sitting around giving their opinions on it. I don't remember a lot of people just dissecting things and being like, "Well, this could be this and this could be that." As I grew up, I started seeing that more, and now that is all you see on most of your news channels. You hear people using lots of descriptive language and lots of subjective words in an attempt to make the subjective objective for everybody watching.
I actually have a way that I've been explaining science for years now, and you bring up a good point about subjective versus objective and all that. Is I have been saying for years now that science, even scientific facts as we know them, are simply the most popular opinion.
Or what's accepted for the moment, because science
Exactly.
has its own, it's
Ever growing.
what really gets me. And again, I don't want to make people upset, but if you're upset, you're just gonna have to deal with it, because I'm gonna say it. And I'm not specifically trying to call anybody out, but you can never make a statement like the science is settled and expect that to be objectively true, because it isn't, no matter how many people believe in it. It
It never
may
will
be
be.
in agreement for a length of time, and that length of time could be 1,000 years of human history. I mean, they believed in certain things in
Einstein's
the
theory of
medieval
special
days,
relativity.
yep, or even earlier than that, for hundreds of years at a time before new scientific methods and new technologies were like, no, that's not true. We discovered this. And so it's now, okay, it's this. Science cannot be settled because it's always changing. So science is always subjective,
At
no
all
matter
times.
how objective it becomes. It can be temporarily objective as people agree that, yes, this works, such as, again, laws of physics and whatnot. Um, and it goes back to kind of, because we've talked about quantum mechanics, and I brought up back when I was in chemistry class. I'm going to mention it again because it's a good example, of the subjective versus the objective. If we had a teacher who, at the beginning of the year, he said, "Hey, if any one of you in this class can figure out how to align your molecules in just the right way that you can pass through that solid wall over there, you'll get an A for the year. You'll pass the year no matter what." And because he knew nobody could do it, but theoretically somebody could. Just because nobody had done it yet
Didn't
doesn't
mean it was
mean they couldn't,
impossible.
because it is theoretically possible. It's a subjective thing based on if you can arrange all of your things. And that may become an objective uh, thing if people see you do it. It'll shatter some preconceptions, and people are like, "Oh, he
Mhm.
did it. He walked through the wall." But even then, some people might be like, "No, it's a trick. Couldn't possibly done it. It's all fake." And you won't change people.
I think now might be a good time to mention string theory because that completely negates Einstein's theory of special relativity. Does it not?
Um, since you've been doing some research here, now I've done a lot of research in the past, but if you've
Mhm.
been on this topic recently, you've got a fresh
Yeah.
perspective of it. So, what do you got to tell us about string theory? It's one
Okay,
of my
so
favorites too. So,
yeah, my understanding of string theory from what I've been researching lately, and this has been really complicated for me. Like I've had multiple times where
it's
I've
not
had to,
simple math. It is
yeah,
not
like I've
simple
had
math.
I've had to stop researching for a few hours because my head literally started to hurt. But from the way I understand it, string theory is the idea that two molecules can photons, molecules, atoms, whatever, are able to communicate even billions and billions of light years away from each other instantaneously, which would negate Einstein's theory of special relativity, which states that nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. And that, here's where it gets even more complicated. The wave function will collapse once it is observed, but there's also an alternative theory that rather than the wave function collapsing, some people believe that you, as the observer, actually become part of the wave function, and it will split off into, I don't know how else to explain it, essentially a multiverse. And it'll branch off into where you observe it doing one thing in this branch, and you observe it doing another thing in this branch. And I didn't really get too far into it, but have you heard about the theory, something about a teapot on Mars or something?
Yeah, I believe an
Could you
author
explain
that I
that a little
read.
bit better for us?
Uh, Let me make sure I get the wording right because I read about it in a book.
And I
It's
thought
not
that was
his
a very good
theory, but
example.
I know it's a theory that's been out there, um, or rather, not. It's a thought experiment
Yeah, because it's more
rather
like the
than a
burden
theory,
of proof lies on the observer.
and it's called Russell's Teapot. Is
Yeah,
the
that's the
name?
one.
It's labeled as an analogy, but it's a thought experiment by Bertrand Russell. Um, he was between the 1870s and 1970s. And he's the first person that said the philosophical burden of proof lies upon a person making empirically unfalsifiable claims as opposed to shifting the burden of disproof to others. Basically, if you're going to tell someone something that requires proof, you have to provide the proof.
Yeah.
It's not up to the person listening to you to prove you wrong. Although, unfortunately, as anybody who's been on social media for the last 10, 15, 20 years knows,
Oh.
it frequently flips the other way, where if somebody says, hey, this is what's going on, and somebody says, no, I don't think so. And then they say, okay, yeah, prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. Do your Google, do your this, do your whatever. And then it
Prove
turns
yourself
into a
right.
thing. Yeah, it turns into a thing, and nobody's right. Like it
Yep.
just turns into an argument because nobody's willing to listen to the other person. Even the person who's like, hey, you got to prove what you just said. Oh, well,
They don't
no, you
want to
have to
see your
prove me wrong.
evidence.
And that's it. Like,
Yep.
if I'm just because I'm not going to prove it for you doesn't mean it can't be proven. Prove me wrong. See if you can't. And like, even when you
Cognitive
do
dissonance
sometimes,
at its finest.
and that's the next thing we're going to get into.
Yeah.
Because even if you do prove them wrong with facts and figures and links and
Research
objective
by
evidence,
MIT, for example.
people will say, oh, it's politically biased, or it's paid for by this,
It's
or
just a
it's
theory.
propaganda, or whatever. And I I talked about this with Steven. Was it earlier today or was it yesterday? I don't remember which day we mentioned it. Um, but the cognitive dissonance, which is I don't always like using the term because it's one of those things that's become a buzzword that's been
Yeah.
overused by people in the wrong context a lot. It's a true thing, but a lot of people have been misusing it just like other things. Like when people say, oh, gaslighting and straw man and ad hominem and whatever, they don't understand any of those terms, but they definitely know that you're using them in that way.
Ooh, I like that one, James. I
um,
believe everything and I believe nothing. Inspector Jack
Inspector Clouseau.
Clouseau.
Inspector Clouseau,
Yeah.
always after the Pink Panther. Um,
That's a good one.
um, but cognitive dissonance is when someone has a belief that is so strong in their mind, their subjective reality is so rock solid that even if you can objectively, in many, many, many ways, show that, hey, that's not true, there's this and this and this, they'll be so divorced from that that they will either refuse to believe it or they'll develop mental illness attempting to not believe it because they can't see the world any other way. Um, and a lot of people have that. It's super common, um, which is why people use the term all the time, although people use the term incorrectly. because they'll
Yeah.
say, "Oh, you just got this," just because you don't agree with them.
Could that
But
relate to the law of attraction at all?
sort of. That's another thing that's gotten
Yeah.
way out of control. Like there's been, I see so many memes
My
of
summoning
people
powers.
controlling the law of attraction. Like, oh yes, is this, and I'm like, it's become really lame. Like that's my subjective take on it now.
Yes.
Like
You've
all
seen
of the
my
law of
summoning
attraction stuff
powers.
is so overquoted that it's super lame, and it's like you can't apply that to every single situation in life. You just can't. And it's
I
like a
find
pet
it
peeve of mine. I
hilarious.
go nuts about it, but I just like don't say anything, don't type anything up, because nobody will care. But um, it's another example. It's there. There's all of these ways that people have of seeing the world, and no matter how much you show them the alternatives, or even that alternatives exist, they they won't believe it, and they will frequently lash out at you for it, which is where our political system is today with the two-party system. It doesn't even matter what any of the names are. People are mad about this guy, they're mad about that guy, and they say, look at all the crimes this guy has done, look at all the ways this guy hasn't helped the nation, look at all this and all this. But it honestly doesn't matter because
Support their party no matter
they're
what.
yeah, they're gonna support the blue no matter who, or the red until I'm dead. It's it's never going to change for them regardless, because if we don't keep our side strong, then the other side is going to win.
Without getting too deep into it, it's just a big popularity contest.
Yeah, basically. And it goes even deeper than that. Honestly, it just gets to be so ingrained that this is just the way things are. And I don't know, it drives me crazy. I stay really connected with politics because I have to know what's going on. I have
Yeah.
this need to know the information, to know events, but I hate it because they always
Yeah.
make me angry. But I need to know,
Yeah.
because if I don't know, I'm going to be more irritated
Yeah, I
when
felt the
something
same
happens that
way.
affects me.
Yeah, I felt the same way when I wasn't on social media. Like after I came back, I'm like, yeah, I miss knowing things.
Yeah. Yeah, I always make sure I check the news every day, constantly, multiple times during the day, see what's going on. I usually don't comment on it because what does it matter?
Some
Or
of it's kind of funny.
and what's really funny is seeing multiple outlets report the same thing in different
Hmm.
ways with different language and see how they spin it for their side or the other side. But that's getting a little bit
Yep.
farther into the subject here. Pardon me. I have a quote that I screenshot here. Um, Now this is I don't know if anybody's going to know who this is. If you do, I don't know if you're going to think of it favorably or not. Um, this is a from a book. It's only a short part because he gets into some other things that are really not relevant to the conversation, and I don't entirely also agree with either. But this is from a book written by Mr. Stephen Flowers, who is a left-hand path practitioner. He's controversial in various communities because people have said he's into white supremacy and racism and all kinds of things like that. And I don't know how much of that is true. I haven't read a lot of
That's why
his work, only a
Rockstar won't
little.
let me use 888.
Um, but I'm in a forum where he actually is, and he posts and things like that, and I've seen his posts, and they don't seem, they don't seem racist to me. But I don't know, maybe that's my own confirmation bias, I guess. I don't know. But he wrote this about the subjective. This is mostly about the subjective. It only has a couple of nods towards the objective, but this is what he wrote about the subjective. Now he uses some language that might be difficult to follow, so just bear with me. And this is his opinion also. This is his subjective opinion.
Yeah.
He wrote, the subjective universe is the world of any sentient entity within the universe. There are as many subjective universes as there are sentient beings,
Hmm.
which is probably true. We can probably objectively agree on that.
Ooh.
Um, Usually, experience of the objective universe is only indirect, as information concerning it must come through the subjective universe. And that's an interesting point, too, because we have to interpret everything else through our own senses, our own thoughts, and our own interior.
In a second, I did some research on that as well.
So we'll segue right into that after we're done with
Okay.
this. Um, Curiously enough, the subjective universe does not seem governed by the same natural, mechanical, organic laws as the objective universe. In fact, this is the main distinction between them. The subjective universe has the option of acting in a non natural way because we can be kind of not quite right in our minds or our senses can be off or things like that, um, i.e., free from the limitations of the world of five senses and three dimensions. He continues to say, at this point, it might be worth pointing out that the terms objective slash subjective have nothing in common with this distinction between accurate and inaccurate. And that's the point I think I made earlier on, that
Yeah.
either one can be true, um, or exact, which popular usage might have projected onto the terms. The subjective universe is capable of far more accurate and exact manifold operations than the objective universe. Your reading and understanding of these words is based on the exercise of a faculty within your subjective universe. You understand what he's saying because you subjectively are interpreting them, even though the words themselves are
Mentally.
an objective viewing. Um, in the simple grammatical terms, the subject is the reader, i.e., that which reads, and the object is that which is read. The subjective universe is capable of a full spectrum of possibilities, which range from virtually absolute precisions to almost total delusion, because it is not bound by natural laws. The focus or epicenter of this non natural subjective universe is equated with human consciousness, or, as he says, the soul or self.
I like that.
So it's a pretty in-depth and a bit more descriptive way of explaining how I presented things at the beginning of the show. It's that, and it really puts a lot of things into perspective, because no matter how objective
Yeah.
things can be, no matter how agreed upon or how accepted,
You interpret them with your senses.
that's true. It all has to filter through how you see, how you understand, how you think
Taste.
about things, the experiences you've had. All those different things will interpret the information coming through. The information at its most basic is the objective, and the subjective is the interpretation. Now, that being said, we're going to flip back over to Steve the Intern.
All right. So I also felt like I did a little bit of research on tulpas as well, and I was surprised at how much it was actually ingrained in Buddhism as well. And I
Mhm.
learned quite a bit. And just to put it briefly, one of the Buddhist beliefs, according to my research, is they believe that the earth itself, as we know it, is a tulka, or a physical manifestation of ideals and focused energies and thoughts. And there's actually a little bit of science behind that as well, because right here, our nervous system will project visual images into our eyes and retinas, but our emotions can also influence what we perceive to be there as well. Like if you find offensive language on a wall, it's only offensive if you understand the language. Like if, whatever word it is, I'm not going to say it because this is a family show,
Mhm.
but, if you find something that you find to be like adult language or offensive on the wall, would you still find it offensive if it were written in a foreign language that you didn't understand?
That brings a good point, because occasionally throughout history, I've read, and I don't, and I've read certain like biographies and autobiographies from people who've written about when they were young and they immigrated to a different place and they were a foreigner. And the people who lived there, maybe they were a child, and the people who lived there would use a derogatory term when they were talking to them. But being that they'd never heard that term, had no
Yeah.
idea what it meant, had no idea what the people were talking about, they didn't know it was a problem. And they would just be like, okay. And it only became an insulting or offensive term when they went back home and they said, hey mom, hey dad, they called me this at school. Is it
Yeah.
I don't know what that means. And they explained this is a bad thing. They called you a bad thing. It's only because now you've experienced that it's a bad thing that
That
you
now it hurts your
understand it as a bad
feelings.
thing. hmm
Yeah.
And you're confused because you're like, well, why would they call me that? Why is it bad? I don't understand. You just know it's bad and it should bother you. So from then on, it bothers you.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that are like that in the world too. That are people will say that certain language is objectively offensive, and sure, at this point we can all agree on some things, whether it makes sense or not. It's like, yes, you say this word.
One of these fingers is offensive.
Yeah, you do certain motions or people say certain words, and it bothers you, and we all agree on it.
Yeah.
But if we were all like, nah, that doesn't bother me anymore, eventually some of those things might be phased out. People might not use certain language because obviously it's not getting the reaction they wanted anymore. It's not shocking, it's not offensive, it's not bothering people. And it's a funny thing because when you say that, people are like, you can't just forget it, it's said with such malice. But that's the thing behind it. It's the angry feelings and the intent
Yeah.
behind it that makes it what it is. It's not the language itself, it's the intent. And that's another part between subjective and objective, is intent is part of the subjective, whereas something just static is what it is objective.
Yeah.
Now, the thought that the idea that everything in existence is just living in a dream has been around for a long time as well. It's one of those things that's kind of ingrained in our consciousness. There's been a lot of old
Yeah.
stories and old tales, and some of them have been um, like Lovecraft had one of his and I can never remember which, if it's an ancient one or an elder god, or there's like a third category. He's got three categories of eldritch beings that are
Yeah.
beyond comprehension. One of them is asleep, and if it wakes up, then the universe ends because it's connected to it on that level. And that's not a new idea. There's
Yeah.
been other cultures that have said, yeah, it's all a part of a dream of some entity, and if it wakes up, and there's been a lot of things that have explored that concept, like
And science as well.
mhm, there was and I didn't watch the show a lot, but in Adventure Time there's like this sleeping old man who's part of, somehow partly involved in the universe, in that if he's asleep, then you use his dreams to create wishes or something like that. I don't remember
Okay.
the exact context. I didn't watch much of that show. I watched the sequel
Yeah.
show afterwards for anybody who follows along. I watched the one with the girl and the cat, and that was,
Finn and Cake.
yeah, Fiona and Cake. That was much
Fiona
better.
and Cake. Yeah, that's it.
It was cohesive. It wasn't filled with as much like silly, just like nonsense
Randomness.
jokes, and that's why I couldn't get in the first one.
Yeah.
But and I'm probably getting part of this wrong, but if he's awake, then he can't do certain things and it causes problems in the universe. But if he's sleeping, then certain parts of the universe function well. And that's an example in pop culture of something that, um, of a being that causes reality to change based on whether they're awake and asleep. And that also brings me to something else that I almost forgot I was going to mention.
Uh-oh.
Um, it's a book that I have, and it's called The Lathe of Heaven. A lathe is a woodworking tool, first
Oh, I
off.
think you've mentioned this one before.
Um, and this was written by Ursula K. Le Guin in 1971. It's an old science fiction novel. It's won a ton of awards. Um, and now the Wikipedia, which is both subjective and objective, depending on your outlook, um, says that the novel explores themes and philosophies such as positivism, Taoism, behaviorism, and utilitarianism. But the basic idea of it is there's a guy who, every time he goes to sleep, his dreams are able to alter the past and present reality. And
Freddy
the
Krueger.
only person that notices is him.
Oh
No one
wow.
else notices. So he approaches this scientist who has this machine who can analyze and record the things so they can detail what changed and what doesn't. But
And that's the
the
yeah.
scientist wants to use it for his own enrichment and become like famous and things like that. And it all backfires and the universe starts falling apart because the guy starts developing mental issues. So when he goes to sleep, mental just it just
Oh,
goes crazy. And and he gets so frustrated because every time he goes to sleep, when he wakes up, everything is different to some extent, and he's the only person that knows.
he's the
Nobody else knows
Mandela
it.
effect.
So he looks crazy because he's like, "No, I knew you. You were my next door neighbor, and now you're not. You're my boss, and now this is this, and now this is that." And I'm not like quoting exact events from the book.
No,
I'm
it
just,
sounds like my life.
but it's a really interesting novel, and it's most of it is from the perspective of the other people in the book. It's not all from his perspective.
Yeah.
So most of it you see of all these other people are regarding this
So it's
guy
the
who's like
second
constantly
person.
confused and constantly like, and they're trying to interact with him, be like, well, help us understand. And he can't because he goes to sleep. He dreams that things are different and then things are different. And then he
Oh
wakes up
wow.
and he has to deal with the fact that they're different. And eventually I think he gets like things work out for him. Like the machine cures him or something like that. And then the guy who was running the machine, he has financial ruin because he can't bank on the guy's reality changing stuff anymore.
Yeah.
Because he engineers things to such an extent, like he's able to guide the guy's dreams through the machine. So he ends up being like the head of the world and all this other kind of stuff. And there's peace on Earth with a iron fist and things like that. And that he controls everything. But it's fascinating. It's a good book for anybody
Yeah.
who's wants to see an older view
Sounds really
of
good.
what we're talking about. The Lathe of Heaven, Lathe, um, by Ursula K. Le Guin. Now, from there, you were talking about the Matrix, which is,
Yes.
as I've said many times on the show, not one of my favorite movies. However, I can see objectively.
Yeah.
I'm gonna fly away one of these times. I can see why people are into it, and I can see the benefits of it and everything like that, and how it's relevant to various things. So, um, give us your thoughts and your ideas about that.
Okay. So, for starters, I would like to mention there's something known as, I'm probably going to butcher this, panphysicism, which my understanding is the belief that reality is both objective and subjective at the same time. And that is why I wanted to bring up the Matrix, because in the Matrix, I was actually having this discussion at work the other day, and I was like, before I discovered panphysicism, and I was like, okay, in the Matrix, I would argue that it is both objective and subjective, because the Matrix, when you're inside the simulation where Neo has all his powers and everything, he's basically lucid dreaming, which would be subjective in the mind. But at the same time, while he's lucid dreaming, his physical body is still in the objective world being drained by the robots. So I would argue that The Matrix is actually a documentary, fictional documentary, obviously, on panphysicism and was Hollywood's way of trying to introduce the concept to people.
Now, on that same point, they actually kind of address that within the confines of the movie. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but I do remember some parts. I remember the one guy, the Weasley guy from the first movie, who ends up like betraying everybody because he wants to get plugged back in.
Okay.
Because he knows he knows
Yeah.
objectively
That it's not
that it's
real,
all fake, that it's all just, manipulation.
but it feels
He
real.
It feels real to him and he prefers it as his subjective reality because he doesn't like what the actual reality is. He would rather be in the subjective, even knowing that it's not real, because he said he sits in a restaurant with who's the agent? Is it Agent whoever, who's also Elrond from Lord of
Agent
the Rings?
Smith, maybe?
Agent Smith.
It's been a long time since I've seen it too.
And he sits with him in a restaurant. He's eating steak. He's like, I know that this steak, there's nothing real about it, but it's absolutely delicious anyway. I'm not
Yeah.
getting the actual dialogue right, which is fine. I'm just
Yeah,
paraphrasing. But he
close
goes
enough.
through this whole thing where he's just like, I know for a fact that this is not real. I'm not here eating it. I'm plugged in. I'm just sitting in a tube somewhere, but this is delicious and I like it and I want more of this. And that's when he makes the deal. When he turns on everybody. And it, it's an it's a interesting it's one of the few things that I thought kind of like the movie
Yeah.
did make sense, even though I didn't like it. But it's one of the few philosophical things that was kind of like, all right, I'm into that because that's
Yeah.
people do that every day.
You got to think about it, and every like we were saying a minute ago, like with eating, like you said with eating, you taste, but you don't taste physically. You taste with your brain. You see
Mhm.
with your brain. You smell with your brain. All that is done with your brain. So some people would actually argue that reality is more subjective than objective. Even physical touch is a sensation that we only have because of what our brain interprets. And as such, we can never truly experience the actual objective reality because of the way that we interpret everything through our senses.
Mhm. And that's why, really, when we talk about an objective truth or an objective fact,
There is
it
no such thing.
it's really only something that a
We
majority
guess.
will agree on.
Yeah.
It's something that we can all look at and be like, okay, well, yeah, that there's a chair. And somebody else can be like, no, it's not. It's an elephant. Look, it's gonna stampede and kill us all.
If
But
three people say it's an elephant and one person says it's a chair, then it's an elephant.
yeah, and vice versa. And that's how it goes worldwide. And we've seen many instances.
The dress. I know you've seen that freaking dress
That's
all over
and
social
and I
media.
thought about this earlier too, and I forgot about
Yep.
it till now, but I was going to bring it up.
Yep.
It's a perfect example of it's that meme that showed up on Facebook
And
of
people will
this
just
lady.
insist you're colorblind, but you're
Yep,
not.
this lady bought this dress and she showed a picture of it. And what were the choices? It was either blue and
White and
gold
gold.
or white and gold or
I think it
blue
was white and gold because that's what I saw.
and then blue and something else was the other one that people said they were seeing. Um, but it was a combination of the lighting in the room, the technology in the camera,
And digitizing it, right?
the digital part of it being translated to an online form, and it also depended on how good your eyes were, what if you had any sort of color
Yeah.
blindness or anything. There's a lot of factors involved, and it made the news. It was such a huge thing. Like
Yes, I was
everybody's like,
like,
"Look at
why?
this."
Why is this so popular?
Yeah, and I mean, to me, I think it looked. I think it was blue and gold to me, but
Yeah,
it really doesn't matter
exactly. It's not a big
because
deal. It's a color of a dress.
it's not my dress. It's not in my house. I can't objectively prove it in any way because I don't have it
Yeah,
sitting in front of me to look at. So it was completely unable to
irrelevant.
be objectively proven what colors were involved at all. It was 100% subjective, except for the person who made the picture.
Yeah.
Um, And a few other things came out after that too, because there were some copycat things, but they were still interesting. Like there was a pair of shoes, I think, that were like pink, or they were either pink and something
Oh,
or they were green. It was a
this
weird, like, I don't remember what the exact color combination, but it was like either pink or it was green, and I don't know if that was just somebody made it up or if that was a real thing. But there were a couple of other instances, and sometimes that kind of thing still comes up.
This actually
Somebody will,
reminds me of an actual scientific experiment I came across during my research that was talking about how they have scientifically, okay, like scientists have studied, like gone into a room by themselves, studied a particle, taken notes on it, come out of the
Mhm.
room, another scientist will go into that same room, study that same particle under the same conditions, and observe different things on different notes.
Mhm. And that's exactly why quantum physics exists, quantum mechanics, because
Yes. The double slit experiment.
Mhm. Because nothing in the objective reality is set until it's observed. But then you have to wonder also.
Consciousness.
You have to wonder if it's like that for every single person, or if the first person to see it sets it for everybody else, because that puts the subjective and the objective onto the shoulders of one person. Um, like the first person to see that, yeah, look at this, this particle is glowing, this is doing that, and then somebody comes in, they've already been told by the first person this is glowing. So if they
Yeah.
come up to it,
They're
chances
like, "Hey,
are they're
that's
going to see,
glowing."
oh, it's glowing.
Like when you're
But
watching
what if,
Ghost Adventures.
yeah, but what if somebody comes out and says, hey, go look at that? And the other person's like, why? Don't
Just
ask,
go
just
look
go
at it.
look at it. They come
Yeah.
back out. Are they going to see it glowing? Maybe they will. Maybe they won't.
And actually, that brings up a very valid point about consciousness, and there's a scientific theory to explain that as well.
Lay it on us.
So the scientific theory, as far as I understand it, is essentially there is scientific evidence and the math supports it, even though it defies all a bunch of other science that we already know, like you were saying earlier. The math supports this theory that the universe itself might actually be conscious, and the scientific definition of consciousness is anything that reacts to external stimuli. So one of my favorite a great example I loved that I came up with earlier was a sock. If you have a sock and you pour water on it, it gets wet. Therefore, the sock getting wet is the sock reacting to external stimuli. Therefore, your socks are conscious.
That would validate a lot of animist
And
traditions.
it would also explain the double slit experiment.
Mm. Because then objectively you'll get a whole host of people that'll come in and say, no, it's just a sock.
Yep.
And then you have to wonder if that objective reality is going to come in and override your
Yep.
subjective one. Because if you 100%, like, no matter what everybody says, I know this sock is conscious.
Yes.
If you
That's
100%
me.
perceive that, it's going to be that way for you, and you are
I'm the
always going to
delusional
treat it
one.
that way. But if all these people come in and be like, nah, and if they like enter the doubt into your mind, you're like,
No, you
well,
can't have
I mean,
doubt.
you could be right, because the
If you
doubt, it
have
will
even
change things
1% doubt, it'll break it.
as soon as that comes in. That's like the quantum observing
Yep.
of the particle.
It's like the wave function
Once it's observed,
collapsing.
once the doubt has come in, things change, which is why certain things work out in the universe that are spiritual and why certain things don't. We've
If a tree
talked about
falls
on the
in the
show,
forest.
we've talked about on the show before, we've talked about things like the power of prayer, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And some people will say, well, yeah, you had all this stuff and then somebody got better, but then all these people did this and nothing happened. Why? It depends on
Your level of faith.
it, which is not necessarily something that is tied to something necessarily divine. It's tied a
Mental.
lot into the willpower that each individual person has tied together. The more collective willpower people can pool and 100% believe it is basically what faith is. It's the fact that
Monks.
it's unwavering. if you were like, oh yeah, we're gonna pray for them, but you don't really think much about it, you're just like, yeah, we're gonna pray about it. Somebody will take care of it, and you just go from that. There's no faith involved. There's no belief involved. There's no willpower involved. So if nothing happens or something falls apart, oh, well, I guess it was just that's the plan. You justify it. You brush it off like, well, maybe that was supposed to happen. But that's the difference. It's the collective energy involved, because every thought that goes on in our head is an electrical impulse. Electricity is energy,
Yes.
and so it all comes down as usual. And this is again subjective with some objective evidence. Flying away.
Mhm.
That everything is energy, and the more energy you can focus on something, the more you can cause reality to shape itself around that energy, because
Monks creating tulpas.
Mhm. And in the chat room, James is right.
Yes, I was
Consciousness
looking
does
at
not
that.
necessarily reflect intelligence, and that's also true. That's the difference between sentience and just something that's alive. That's the difference between a lot of
AI.
people, AI, and a lot of animals. A lot of animals are not aware to a level where they identify as I am me, I am this creature. They're all based on instinct. Some animals do. And you'd have to really fight hard to convince me that like my cats don't think that they are themselves, because their egos are out of control. But certain, like, there's a lot of organisms out there that don't think after a fashion. They just act based on the environment, based on this is this, this is this, this is this. Okay, do this, find food, go to sleep, go to the bathroom,
I
make more of
think,
myself,
therefore
etc.
I am.
Which is a good point. Although again, some people think an awful lot and they're essentially nobody. So we have a lot of politicians who think about all kinds of things and they're
Hey,
essentially
hey,
nobody.
hey.
So
Big Brother is watching.
being able to think doesn't mean that your thinking is worth the brain power all the time.
To put it politely.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I like
James
it,
is right
James.
again.
Yep.
Um, James is right again. So it's an interesting thing, and that's really what sets us apart necessarily. It doesn't make us better or worse than
It's
the
what
rest
makes
of
us
the
unique.
animals out there. It just sets us apart. We're basically hyper evolved animals with an
Ooh,
inflated opinion of ourselves, if you want to
actually,
get cynical about it.
I was doing some research earlier and I came across a neuroscientist named Steven Koch, Koch. Yeah, he shares my name. Cool. And so he was explaining consciousness, and when he was talking about it, he actually, you just reminded me, he brought up what I thought was a very good point. He said one of the key things is, you might think, well, an animal might react to external stimuli and, they might know how to communicate with each other, in their own way, but we are the only ones, as far as we are aware, that can actually communicate and share our experiences as being conscious. And he would describe consciousness as anything that has an experience can be considered conscious. But the thing that sets us apart and makes us unique is that we can talk about our experiences. And that's what sets us apart from the animals.
Now, you could say that a beehive is able to communicate on that same level, because you send a single bee out to find
Yes.
something, and it comes back, does its dance to communicate with the others to show where it's been, and
Yeah.
then they all go. But
That could also be considered conscious.
insects are an entirely different level of communication. Like
Are they, though? Are
insects
they?
often can be, they work together in swarms, in groups, in
I
ways that
would
we can't necessarily.
I would actually argue that we're doing a pretty bad job of it, but I would actually argue that humanity as a whole was intended to be a hive mind. That's why we made the internet, so we can all look at all this information and share it with each other instantaneously. We're supposed to be a hive mind, but we're just not doing a very good job of it right now.
And the first Neuralink trials are actually going through right now.
Yep.
I saw some news stories, but I didn't read them too closely, so I can't add on to that. I just know
Yeah.
that the first like Neuralink, yeah, I saw what it actually. There was a man who was fully paralyzed, like
Scientific
he was just there,
immortality.
and he had the Neuralink. They put it in, and he was able to play a game, like a video game,
Like Pong or something?
with his mind. I don't remember what the game was because I didn't
Yeah.
read the article.
Okay.
So bear with me. I probably have some
Yeah.
ignorance about it, and I could look it up, but we're at the last 4 minutes of the
Yeah.
show, so um, but that's it. Like that kind of stuff, it could get here. And I've read a lot of novels about people who are connected on all this different levels
Yeah.
of going through places and being able to tell everybody's emotions all around, and it makes a
Like, it's a little scary, but at the same time, I'm also kind of curious to see where we can take it in both good and bad, because just cyberpunk. I mean, it's about to become reality. You can literally hack somebody and
Mhm.
you can literally just like hack them to, you know, whatever.
Yeah. And on that note, we're at the end of the show. Lots of good information, lots of good discussion. What are your folks' thoughts on subjective reality versus objective? I know we've had a good chat going, especially from James. James is our MVP usually, all the time. Appreciate you having here. Anybody out there who's watching this on demand after the fact, by all means, you can comment on it after the fact. We don't mind. Keep on going. We'll check it out. Um, and yeah, we would love to hear your thoughts about it. So next year's up.
Of course,
Next year.
James.
Next week is up in the air because again, I don't know if Rob realized that he was going to be doing his thing before he told us about this one. And like I said, he usually takes the night off, so we'll see what he wants to do. He may be here or he might not. We might come up with something new to talk about. Lately, our themes have been kind of connected. We've had like a few weeks that have kind of segued into each other. This one went
Yeah.
into last week, and we might try to bridge that into next week as well, having kind of a continuing narrative, even though I hate that term these days as well. That's another word that's been overused in ways that it shouldn't. Um, but don't mind my cognitive dissonance, just like getting in your face here. So that's it. Anything else you would like to say, Steven the Intern?
Thanks for hanging out with us tonight, everybody.
All right. Well,
James,
that's
Sound Zeus, Uncanny Earth. Wait a minute.
from off in the
Yep.
depths of space somewhere.
And I mean, I would make a dad joke before we leave, but I'm not a dad, so I'm technically not allowed to make dad jokes.
And I refuse on principle.
Yep.
So that's it. Thanks everybody for being here. We will see you all next week.